Hi everybody, Karen Schaal Gratitude Gal here, and today I'm coming from Lincoln City, Oregon, halfway between the North Pole and the equator at the 45th parallel. And today we're talking about incremental change. You know, there comes a point when noticing is not enough. We can recognize a fresh start. We can take an honest inventory. We can believe growth is possible. But then comes the real question, what are we going to do with what we know? Because awareness without action can become its own hiding place. We can think about change, talk about change, even pray about change, and still keep living by the same old patterns. And let's be honest, we've all done this. Today we are talking about incremental change, not dramatic reinvention, not changing your whole life by Friday. One small choice pointed in a better direction. Pointed in a better direction, repeated over and over again. In this podcast, you will learn why we often misunderstand change, why small repeated choices matter more than we think, and how one simple practice can begin moving your life in a better direction. This is where choice becomes action, and that is how a life begins to change. This is a Karen Schaal Podcast where we expand the mind and grow the heart. I'm Karen Schaal. Let's get started. Most of us misunderstand change. We tend to picture change as dramatic, a turning point, a before and after moment. And sometimes change does look that way from the outside. I mean, we see the musician on stage, the athlete crosses a finish line. We see the person who seems healthier, stronger, and more at peace. But what we are seeing is not the beginning of change, it is the result of change. The musician sat at the piano, the athlete showed up at the track, the healthier person made choices long before anyone else noticed. That is the hidden work of incremental change. It is harder to respect the process. It's easy to admire the outcome. But the process is where change actually happens. And what is remarkable to me is that human beings understood this long before we had the language of behavior science, before the internet, podcasts, and before published studies were at our fingertips. People understood that life had a process. They may not have called it incremental change, but they lived it. A farmer planted seed and trusted the seasons. A musician practiced before anyone heard the song. A family taught values one day at a time. There was an understanding that growth had to be tended, that skills had to be practiced, that character had to be formed. In many ways, people knew this because they lived closer to the rhythms of the natural world. They saw that life unfolded through process. Today we have another gift. We have the wisdom of the past, and we also have the benefit of research in human development. We can look at studies on habits, attention learning, gratitude, and behavior change, and see what people have understood and practiced for generations. Small, repeated actions shape a life. That should encourage us, because incremental change is not some modern self-help trend. It is woven into the way growth has always happened. And when we understand that, we can begin to trust the process. Earlier in this series, we reflected on the old wisdom often attributed to Lao Tzu. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. It is a line worth returning to because it tells the truth about movement. But before this step, there was a choice to begin. In this way, any journey we undertake begins also with a single choice. That choice may not look impressive, it may not feel powerful, it may not announce itself as life-changing, but small does not mean it's insignificant. A life is rarely shaped by one grand moment. It is shaped by what we are willing to choose, what we are willing to repeat, practice, and return to over time. This is why understanding incremental change matters so much, because the process is always working. It can work for us and it can work against us. We do not usually wake up one morning suddenly disconnected from our lives. We do not usually wake up suddenly out of shape, suddenly distant from people we love. suddenly overwhelmed by habits we never meant to build. We usually arrive there slowly, ignoring warnings, avoiding conversations, compromises, repeated patterns. And then one day we look around and ask, how in the world did I get here? That question can be sobering, but it can also become the beginning of wisdom, because the same process that moves us away from ourselves can also bring us back, little by little, choice by choice, practice by practice. That is the quiet power of incremental change. It teaches us that we are not static. We are not standing still. Even when we do not notice it, we are being shaped. Like the earth beneath our feet, life is always moving, and so are we. And that is why we have to pay attention to direction. Fresh starts reminds us that a new beginning is possible. Taking inventory helps us look honestly at where we are. Growth mindset helps us believe again that change is still possible. And now incremental change shows us how that change begins to happen. Not all at once, but through small choices repeated over time. And with this understanding, we can begin to trust the process, not blindly, not without thought, but with the wisdom to understand that what we repeat is shaping who we become. So what does science tell us about incremental change? It tells us something very important. Slow change is not failed change. Slow change is often how lasting change is built. That matters because many of us judge change too quickly. We try something for a few days, do not feel a great difference, and assume nothing is happening. But research on habits, learning, attention, and behavior tells a completely different story. Small, repeated actions are not wasted. They are how the process begins. One important study comes from researcher Philippa Laley and her colleagues. They studied how habits form in everyday life. Participants chose one simple behavior to repeat each day in the same kind of setting. The researchers wanted to know how long it took for that behavior to become more automatic. And here's what matters for us. It did not happen overnight. It did not happen in one magical number of days. It happened gradually. For some people, it happened sooner. For others, it took much longer. But the pattern was clear. Repetition in a consistent setting helped the behavior become more automatic over time. That helps us understand incremental change better. We are not changed only by what we intend, we are changed again by what we repeat over and over again. James Clear says it this way: every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become. These words carry weight. Let me say it again. Every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become. You may think that one action may not look like much. One walk, one pause, one honest response, one moment of gratitude. But when that action is repeated, it begins to leave evidence. It begins to train the pattern. It begins to shape the person. And this is where the research becomes very practical. If I want to drink more water, I do not need to begin with a dramatic announcement. I can begin by choosing a glass I actually like, keeping it where I can see it, and noticing how many times I refill it. That may sound small, but that is the point. The behavior is tied to a place, a cue, and a repeatable action. If I want to move more, I can use a fitness app to track my steps. It gives me feedback. If I want to become a better listener, I can practice stepping back in conversations. I can notice a moment when I feel the need to jump in, and I can choose to listen a little longer. This kind of change happens through repeated moments of awareness and choice. So here's the first exercise to help you along with this. I call it the evidence log. At the end of the day, do not ask, what did I do to change my life today? That question is way too big. Ask this instead: what did I intentionally do today? Then ask, if I repeated this action 100 times, what kind of person would it help me become? That question helps us stop dismissing the small action. It helps us see that repetition is not empty, that it has value. It is slowly forming a new pattern of behavior. The second area of research comes from psychologist Albert Bandura. We touched on this in our last episode on growth mindset, but it is important enough to bring it forward again. Long before the phrase growth mindset became familiar, Bandura was studying self-efficacy. Self-efficacy simply means a belief that our actions can make a difference. And one of Bandura's strongest points was that this belief grows through mastery experiences. That means we build belief by doing something and seeing that we can do it. This is important because many people wait for confidence before they act. But often confidence comes after action. Confidence is often the receipt, not the purchase price. We do something small, we follow through, we see evidence, and then our belief begins to grow. That is why small wins matter. They are not without value, they are evidence. They teach us I can follow through. So here's a second exercise. I call it Tiny Wins Journal. At the end of the day, write down 3 short lines. One thing I did, one thing I almost did not do, and one thing this proves about me. That last time matters, that last line matters, because we are not only tracking behavior, we are building evidence. Here's an example. One thing I did, I paused before reacting, which proves I can create space for an appropriate response. If I took a walk when I didn't feel like it, that proves I can choose action even when I lack motivation. If I notice one good thing in a difficult day, that proves my attention can be trained to look for good that is around me. These examples are how belief grows. They provide evidence that yes, I can do this. The third area of research is close to my own work with gratitude. Robert Emmons and Michael McCullough were the prominent researchers in the early days of modern gratitude research. And their work demonstrated that gratitude practices can increase well-being. Through their studies, I came to understand gratitude as a powerful emotion. But for me, the deeper shift came when I began reading the work of Alex Wood and his colleagues. They describe gratitude not only as a response to something good that happens, but also as a more stable way of noticing and appreciating the positive aspects of life. Their work changed how I understood gratitude. I began to see that gratitude was not meant to stay in one small compartment of my life. It was not just a journal entry. It was not just a pleasant feeling. It was a life orientation, a way of paying attention, a way of choosing goodness, a way of moving through the world. This understanding became central to my own practice of gratitude. I began making choices towards goodness, choices toward thankfulness, choices toward appreciation, kindness, and understanding. And over time, those repeated choices began to shape me. At first, gratitude was something I practiced, but eventually it became something I lived. It became a part of how I noticed the world around me, how I viewed myself and others. It became part of how I responded, of who I was becoming. But let's be honest, it was a process. It happened through repeated attention and repeated choice. That is why I call gratitude a transformational emotion, because an authentic practice of gratitude trains us to notice goodness, choose goodness, and slowly become more available to goodness, creating a life that is grounded in appreciation and thanksgiving. So the third exercise I want to share with you is called the attention practice. It's actually pretty simple. At the end of the day, write down one good thing you noticed, just one. Then write one sentence about why it mattered. This exercise helps us to start paying attention. And paying attention matters because what we repeatedly notice begins to shape how we experience our lives. This played out in my own life when I was practicing how to respond differently to criticism. My old pattern was to react quickly, to defend, to answer before I had really listened. I didn't like this pattern of behavior. It didn't exemplify the person I wanted to be. So I began practicing something different. I practiced pausing and listening. I practiced giving myself a moment before responding. And what was remarkable was that one day someone said something to me that normally would have set off that old reaction. I felt that familiar rise inside. But this time something different happened. I listened. I processed what was being said. I responded instead of reacting. And I remember thinking, wow, this stuff works. That was exciting because what I had been practicing was beginning to show up in real life. It was no longer just an idea, it was a reality. That is what incremental change can do. It can take something we practice with effort and over time make it more natural. It can take a better choice and slowly turn it into a better pattern. This is why it is so important to trust the process, not blindly, but because research and real life keep pointing us to the same truth. Repeated action shapes us. Repeated attention shapes us. Repeated practice shapes us. The practical application is not complicated. Choose one small action worth repeating. Track the evidence. Pay attention to what it is forming in you. This is how incremental change becomes real. Little by little, choice by choice, practice by practice. So before we close, let's bring this back to one simple truth. Incremental change is generally not dramatic. Sometimes it looks like one small choice, one repeated practice, one quiet return to the person we are trying to become. Not all at once, not through one grand moment, but through the choices we are willing to repeat. That is why an understanding of incremental change matters so much, because we are always being shaped by what we practice, what we return to, and what we allow to become familiar. This can be sobering, but it is also hopeful, because if small choices can move us away from the life we want, small choices can also help bring us back. Remember, the journey begins with a single choice. So here is my invitation for you this week. Choose one small action worth repeating, just one. One small choice that moves you in a better direction. Maybe it is pausing before you respond, going on a walk, drinking more water. Maybe it is noticing one good thing and letting gratitude have a little more room in your life. Use the exercises we discussed, and please do not dismiss the small choice. Small choices are not meaningless, they are evidence. They provide direction, and over time, direction becomes a life. Next time in our final podcast in this series, we will talk about something we all need when change feels slow, and that is to trust the process. Because once we understand that small repeated choices are shaping us, we can begin to trust that the process of incremental change is working even before we see the full result. If today's episode spoke to you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who is desiring a change in their own lives. I have also included links in the description to all the podcasts I discussed here. And please know, I sincerely appreciate you sharing your time with me today. This is the Karen Schaal Podcast, where we expand the mind and grow the heart. I'm Karen Schaal. See you next time. Bye-bye.